In Jerusalem today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio downplayed tensions with Israel after a deadly strike on Hamas negotiators in Qatar that sparked outrage in some corners of the Middle East. President Trump had previously said that he was, quote, very unhappy about the attack in Qatar, a key U.S. ally that hosts thousands of American troops and a critical player in mediating ceasefire and hostage talks. But today, Rubio showed very little daylight between the Trump administration and Netanyahu.
Hamas can no longer continue to exist as an armed element that threatens the peace and security, not just of Israel, but of the world, and that the people of Gaza deserve a better future, one that cannot begin until Hamas is eliminated and until all of the hostages, both living and deceased, are home.
The secretary's visit coincides with an emergency Arab Islamic summit today in Doha, working to issue a collective response to the Israeli attack. Joining me now, NBC's Matt Bradley, reporting from Tel Aviv, and Aaron David Miller, senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a former Arab-Israeli negotiator. Matt, what do we know about the tenor of those conversations between Rubio and Netanyahu?
Well, as you said, there was no daylight between them, and we've seen so many changes in this relationship between Jerusalem and Washington over the past 2 years. And it looks like once again, even though we had this public airing of complaint by President Donald Trump just over the past couple of days about how Israel attacked Doha, those Hamas leaders, and they did so without giving the United States the opportunity to object. Now, as we're seeing Marco Rubio here in Israel, now just siding completely with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who returned the favor with some fulsome praise of his own of the U.S. and American relation, the U.S.-Israeli relationship. Here's Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Your presence here in Israel today is a clear message that America stands with Israel. You stand with us in the face of terror, in the face of the incredible, I would almost say, Middle Ages lies that are directed against us.
And as you can see here, Ariel, there is, as you mentioned, no daylight between these two. Now, the big question is, as Marco Rubio heads on to Doha now, where, as you mentioned, there was that meeting that has just come out with a statement that very strongly condemned Israel and pleaded with the international community to take Israel to task over its attacks against Hamas leaders in Doha. So now Marco Rubio is more likely to have a tougher time in Doha, speaking to leaders of the Gulf Cooperation Council and of Arab and Islamic countries who are badly smarting from this attack by the Israelis. And it looks as though, as we heard from Rubio earlier today, that the prospects for a negotiated settlement to end that fighting in the Gaza Strip is now impossibly more remote even than it was before. Ariel.
Matt Bradley, thank you so much for your reporting there from Tel Aviv. And Aaron, as someone who's watched the Middle East like you for many, many years, I have to zoom out for a moment and say this feels like a bit of a replay of what we saw before the U.S. helped strike Iran's nuclear sites. You saw Trump talking tough, telling Israel not to do it so that diplomatic efforts could ensue. But then it seemed like it was a bit of a smokescreen in that instance. Here, perhaps maybe a way to diffuse tensions with Qatar after Israel's attack?
You know, some adventurous journalists, thanks for having me, will have to do a deeper dive on the TikTok about what the president knew and when he knew it. The reality is, I wonder if this strike had succeeded, that is to say, the Israeli strike to eliminate the entire external leadership of Hamas, beginning with Khalil al-Hayya, who's probably the most influential external leader. Had that succeeded, you might have seen a different reaction from Donald Trump. I think it's quite clear that the president has, for any number of reasons, ceded both the tactics and the strategy of dealing with Israel and Hamas and hostages to the Israelis. And I think that's incredibly clear, terrifyingly clear, in the wake of Israel's, what I would argue is an own goal, striking Hamas, angering the Americans to the degree that they're angry, and I'm not sure they are, alienating the Qataris, who actually mediated with the Egyptians the return of 130 of the 252 hostages that Hamas willfully took, executing some last year. So I think we are no closer. We're weeks away from the second year of this war, and we are no closer to a resolution and releasing hostages or planning for a better future for long-suffering Palestinians in Gaza.
So I have to ask you, a diplomat with knowledge of these talks tells NBC News that Qatar's key negotiator, who regularly talks with both Israel and Hamas, was due to be in that villa that Israel hit, but at the very last moment, his meeting with Hamas was somehow delayed. What does that tell you about maybe what is going on behind the scenes there? And is there more than meets the eye? Was this Israel's attempt at warning the Hamas leaders that are there in Doha that they better get to the negotiating table and negotiate, or they can reach them wherever they are?
I think that the prime minister had concluded, and this maybe was an assessment of the Shin Bet, not Mossad. David Barnea, who heads up Mossad, reportedly has an open letter basically saying that this was not a good idea because the Israelis didn't give the negotiations in Doha that were ongoing a chance to succeed. But given the proposal on the table, there was absolutely no way that Hamas was going to agree to a proposal to release hostages dead and alive on the first or second day of this truce with some guarantee that the Israelis would end the war and withdraw their forces from Gaza. No, I think this is an offshoot of Israel's calculation in the wake of October 7 that they will pursue a risk-ready approach to preempting and preventing any sort of hostile activity. And let's be clear, all of these external leaders were marked on October 7th. And in some respects, as in the wake of Munich, the Israelis will probably hunt them down over time. Again, I think let's be clear. You're 2 years into this war, largely because the mutually acceptable solutions for Hamas and this Israeli government are simply fundamentally misaligned. Hamas wants an end to war and they want to survive. Benjamin Netanyahu wants an end to Hamas and something that I think is elusive, total victory. I don't think that's possible. So the war goes on with President Trump, probably the only external variable that might be able to change the calculations. And frankly, I think he's concluded in the end that a fight with the Israelis is simply not worth having because the payoff of such a fight, ending the war in Gaza, a better future for Gaza, releasing the hostages, eliminating Hamas, is simply something he cannot produce.
It will be very interesting for all of us to see what happens in Doha, both maybe behind the scenes and also from the statements from that Arab Islamic summit. Aaron David Miller, thank you so much.